8 months later, Carmen stood in front of a classroom for the first time in 16 years. Not her own classroom yet. She still had 2 more certification exams to pass, but she was guest teaching today at the community college where she'd been taking courses. Her professor had invited her to share her story with his education students, and she'd been nervous about it all week, but now, looking at the 25 young faces staring back at her, she felt something click into place. This was where she belonged. This was who she was. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez," she began, her accent still present but her English much stronger than it had been 8 months ago. "And I want to tell you about the night my life changed because of a book." She told them about cleaning houses, about reading in secret, about being caught by her employer and thinking she'd lose everything. She told them about Richard's offer and the foundation, and how she'd gone from being terrified to being hopeful. But mostly she told them about the power of education and the importance of never giving up on who you are. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one student raised her hand. She looked young, maybe 19, with nervous eyes. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm an immigrant too," the girl said quietly. "I came here from Vietnam with my parents 5 years ago. My mom was a nurse back home, but here she works at a nail salon because she can't get certified. She's too tired and too broke to go back to school. Is there really help for people like her?" Carmen felt her heart squeeze. This was exactly why the foundation existed. "Yes," she said firmly. "There is help. Let me tell you about the Luz Foundation." After class, 7 students came up to talk to her. They all had similar stories. Parents who'd been professionals in their home countries but were working service jobs here. Aunts and uncles who'd given up their dreams. Family members who were brilliant and skilled but trapped by circumstances and bureaucracy. Carmen took down all their information. By evening, she'd sent it all to Richard, along with a note that said, "We need to expand faster than we planned. The need is overwhelming." He called her within an hour. "How many people do you think we could help if we doubled the budget?" "Richard," she said, still not quite used to calling him by his first name even though he'd insisted months ago. "Are you sure? That's a lot of money." "Carmen, I made $14 million last quarter doing absolutely nothing useful," he said. "Just moving money around, buying companies, selling companies. It was meaningless. This means something. Send me a proposal for expansion. Think big, think big." Carmen smiled as she hung up the phone. 8 months ago, she'd been reading books in secret, afraid to even dream about teaching again. Now she had an office, a salary, and she was helping build something that could change thousands of lives. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was Isabella. Her daughter had visited 3 times in the past 8 months, and each visit had been better than the last. The anger had started to fade, replaced by understanding and slowly reconnection. Isabella's text had a photo attached. "Mom, I got accepted. Full scholarship to UC Berkeley. Pre-med program. I can't believe this is real." Carmen stared at the acceptance letter in the photo and started crying right there in her new office with its windows and plants and photos of her mother on the desk. Her baby was going to be a doctor. Her baby was going to have the chances Carmen had fought so hard to give her. She was still crying when Richard knocked on her doorframe. He'd started coming by the foundation office almost every day now, more involved in the work than in his own companies. His board of directors wasn't thrilled about that, but as he'd told them, he was finally doing something that mattered. "Good tears or bad tears?" he asked, stepping inside. "Good tears," Carmen said, showing him the photo. Isabella got in. "She's going to Berkeley." "That's fantastic," Richard said, genuinely excited. "We should celebrate. Let me take you and Isabella out to dinner when she comes to visit. Somewhere nice." "You don't have to do that," Carmen said automatically, even though she'd learned to accept his generosity better over the past months. "I know I don't have to," Richard said. "I want to. Besides, I have news too. We got our nonprofit status approved, and I've been contacted by 3 other wealthy individuals who want to start similar foundations in their cities. They heard about what we're doing and want to replicate it. Carmen, this could spread nationwide." Carmen felt dizzy with the possibility of it all. "Nationwide? Do you realize how many people we could help?" "Tens of thousands eventually," Richard said. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. "But I want to make sure we do it right. I want to make sure every foundation stays true to the mission, which is why I need to ask you something." "What?" "How would you feel about being the executive director? Not just of this foundation, but of the whole network as we grow. You'd be setting standards, training people, overseeing programs across multiple cities. It would mean more responsibility, more travel, but also more impact. Carmen leaned back in her chair. Executive director of a national organization. A year ago, she'd been terrified of being caught reading books. Now she was being offered a position that could affect thousands of lives. Can I think about it? She asked. It's not that I don't want to, it's just, I still have exams to finish. I still want to teach, Richard. That's always been the dream. I know, he said, and you will teach. We're planning to add an educational component to the foundation. Remember, classes for people going through the certification process. You'd be perfect for that. You could do both, teach and direct, or you could just teach if that's what you want. This isn't about me forcing you into something. It's about giving you options. Carmen had spent 15 years without options, without choices. Now she had too many to count. Let me finish my certifications first, she said. Then we'll talk about the director position. But Richard, I need to say something. Thank you. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. You didn't just change my life. You gave me my life back. Richard waved his hand dismissively, but she could see he was touched. You did the work, Carmen. I just wrote some checks. You're the one who took classes while working full-time. You're the one who never gave up even when it seemed impossible. You're the one who's turning this foundation into something real. I'm just the guy who got lucky enough to catch you reading in his library. We both got lucky that night, Carmen said. You needed to remember why you worked so hard, and I needed someone to believe in me. We helped each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the office window, Carmen could see the city spread out below. Somewhere out there were thousands of people like she had been. People with skills and dreams, working jobs that didn't use their talents, feeling invisible and forgotten. But they weren't invisible anymore. The Luz Foundation was finding them one by one, and each person they helped became a light themselves, going out into the world to teach or heal or build or create. Luz had meant light, and that's exactly what they were doing. Lighting up dark places, showing people the way forward. There's something else, Richard said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. This came today. I wanted to give it to you in person. Carmen opened the envelope. Inside was a certificate. She read it once, then again, not quite believing what she was seeing. The Luz Foundation Education Center, she read aloud. In honor of Carmen Rodriguez and her mother, Luz Martinez. Richard, what is this? It's the new wing we're adding to the foundation, Richard explained. A full educational facility with classrooms, computer labs, a library, a place where people can come to study, to take classes, to prepare for their certification exams. And it's named after you and your mother. Carmen couldn't speak. She just held the certificate and cried. Your mother believed in education, Richard continued. She worked in fields so you could learn. You cleaned houses so Isabella could learn. Now we're going to help hundreds of other parents who are doing the same thing. And every time someone walks through those doors, they'll see your names and know that they're not alone, that someone understands, that there's hope. I don't deserve this, Carmen whispered. Yes, you do, Richard said firmly. You deserve this and more. You taught me something important, Carmen. You taught me that the value of a person isn't in their job title or their bank account. It's in their courage, their determination, their refusal to give up on themselves. You had all that while scrubbing my floors and washing my dishes. You were always remarkable. I just helped make sure the world could see it. Carmen stood up and walked around the desk. She hugged Richard, something she never would have dared to do 8 months ago. But they weren't employer and employee anymore. They were friends, partners, two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. Thank you, she said again, for seeing me, for really seeing me. Thank you for letting me, Richard replied. Now come on, let's go tell the staff about the expansion plans. We have work to do. As they walked out of the office together, Carmen thought about that night in the library. She'd been so scared when Richard found her, so certain that her small act of reading would cost her everything. Instead, it had given her everything. It had given her back her purpose, her daughter, her dreams. It had given Richard something too, something he'd been missing without even knowing it. Purpose, connection, meaning. And it had all started with a book, late at night, and two people who were both looking for something they'd lost. Carmen had been looking for herself. Richard had been looking for a reason to keep going. They'd found each other instead. And in doing so, they'd found a way to help hundreds of others find themselves too. The Luz Foundation grew over the next year. Then the year after that. It spread to 5 cities, then 10, then 20. Thousands of people passed through its doors. Former doctors became doctors again. Former teachers returned to classrooms. Former engineers designed buildings again. Each one of them carried forward the light that Carmen and Richard had ignited, and every time Carmen taught a class or helped someone navigate the certification process or counseled a parent who was working 3 jobs and studying late into the night, she thought about her mother. She thought about reading poetry by lamplight, about books that were windows to other worlds, about the power of refusing to give up on who you are. She thought about a millionaire who'd learned to see beyond his own walls, and a housekeeper who dared to keep reading even when it felt impossible. And she knew, without any doubt, that her mother was proud, that she was finally living up to the sacrifices that had been made for her, that she was passing forward the light, just like her mother had always hoped she would, because in the end that's what education was. Not just facts and figures and certifications. It was light. It was hope. It was the belief that people could become more than their circumstances. That dreams didn't have to die just because life got hard. It was a woman reading in a library at 2 a.m, refusing to forget who she was. It was a man learning to be human again, finding meaning in helping others. It was 2 people from completely different worlds, creating something beautiful together. It was possible. It was real. And it was happening every single day. 3 days later, Carmen sat in a conference room at the offices of Blackstone and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. She'd taken the bus there because she still couldn't quite believe any of this was real. And taking a car service felt too presumptuous. She was wearing her best dress, the one she saved for church on Sundays, and she'd been sitting in the lobby for 20 minutes trying to calm her racing heart. When Richard had said he was serious, she hadn't quite grasped what that meant. Now sitting at a table made of wood that probably cost more than she made in a year, surrounded by lawyers in suits that cost more than she made in a month, she was beginning to understand the kind of power her employer wielded. "Miss Rodriguez," one of the lawyers said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. His name was Theodore something, and he had kind eyes behind his expensive glasses. "We've drafted the initial documents for the Luz Foundation. Mr. Hayes has asked that you review everything and make sure we've captured your vision correctly." "My vision?" Carmen said, her voice small in the big room. "I don't know if I have a vision. This is all Mr. Hayes's idea." "Actually," Richard said from his seat at the head of the table, "it's your idea. I'm just the guy with the money. You're the one who knows what immigrant professionals actually need. You're the one who's been living this struggle. So yes, your vision matters. It matters more than mine." Carmen picked up the first page and started reading. The legal language was dense and confusing, but Theodore walked her through it, explaining each section in simple terms. The foundation would focus on helping immigrants with professional credentials get recertified in the United States. It would provide financial assistance for courses, test fees, application costs, and even living expenses during the recertification process. "We've also included provisions for mentorship programs," Theodore explained, "connecting people going through the process with professionals already working in their fields here. And we've set aside funds for legal assistance with visa issues, because that often becomes a barrier." Carmen's hands trembled as she turned the pages. "This is real. This is actually real. Very real," Richard said. "I've committed $5 million for the first year. If it works the way I think it will, we'll expand." $5 million, Carmen whispered. She couldn't even comprehend that much money. "That's just the start," Richard said, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. It was the same excitement she'd heard in her own voice when she talked about teaching. He'd found something that mattered to him. "I've been thinking about this nonstop. We could partner with universities, with professional associations, with community organizations. We could help hundreds of people, maybe thousands eventually." Another lawyer, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. "We've also drafted your personal agreement, Miss Rodriguez. It outlines your new position as Director of Program Development for the Luz Foundation, your compensation package, and the educational benefits Mr. Hayes discussed with you." Carmen's head was spinning. Director of Program Development. It sounded so official, so important. "I don't know if I'm qualified for that. I'm just a housekeeper who wants to teach again. You're someone who's navigated the exact system we're trying to help people with." Richard countered. You're someone who understands the challenges on a personal level. That makes you more qualified than any consultant I could hire. Plus, this way you're not just accepting charity. You're earning this. You're working for it. Carmen looked down at the papers in front of her. The salary listed made her gasp. It was 3 times what she made as a housekeeper. With benefits. With provisions for Isabella's education. With funding for her own certification process, Mr. Hayes, she said slowly. This is too much. People will talk. They'll say things about why you're really doing this. Richard's expression darkened. Let them talk. I don't care what people think anymore. I've spent my whole life caring what people think, and it's made me miserable. Besides, everything here is completely legitimate. We have lawyers, accountants, everything is documented and above board. This is a real foundation with a real mission, and you're a real employee doing real work. But the house, Carmen said. Who will take care of your house? I've hired someone, Richard said. Her name is Anna. She starts next Monday. You'll train her for 2 weeks. Then you'll transition to the foundation full-time. You'll have an office here in this building. We've already leased the space. 2 floors down, corner office with windows. You can decorate it however you want. Carmen felt like she might faint. An office with windows. She'd have her own office. There's one more thing, Richard said, nodding to Theodore. Show her the rest. Theodore pulled out another document. This is for Isabella, a full scholarship. But it's structured as an educational grant through the foundation. She'll apply like any other student. But as the daughter of a foundation employee, she's automatically eligible for full support. 4 years of undergraduate. And if she maintains good grades and gets into medical school, we'll cover that too. That's when Carmen broke down. Not quiet tears this time, but full sobs. All these years of sacrifice. All the nights she'd lain awake worrying about money. All the times she'd had to tell Isabella no when she wanted to come visit. All the guilt of missing her daughter's childhood. It wasn't all fixed. Nothing could give back that lost time, but at least now, at least going forward, things could be different. Patricia handed her a box of tissues. It's a lot to take in, she said kindly. Take your time. I need to call Isabella, Carmen said through her tears. I need to tell her. Can I tell her? Of course, Richard said. In fact, I was thinking maybe you should bring her here. For a visit. Use some of those vacation days you've never taken. Go back to Mexico, tell her in person, and bring her here so she can see where she might be going to school. I can't leave the country, Carmen reminded him. My visa, it's complicated. Not anymore, Richard said. Remember that immigration lawyer I mentioned? She's been working on your case all week. You have an appointment with her tomorrow. We're going to get your status sorted out properly. No more living in fear. No more avoiding travel. You're going to be able to come and go as you need to. Carmen put her head down on the expensive table and cried. She cried for her mother, who never got to see her succeed. She cried for all the years she'd spent away from Isabella. She cried for the version of herself she'd thought she lost forever, the teacher who loved literature and believed in the power of education. She cried because for the first time in 15 years she felt hope. Richard reached across and patted her shoulder awkwardly. He wasn't good at this emotional stuff, but he was learning. It's okay, he said. Let it all out. We've got time. After a while, Carmen sat up and wiped her face. She looked at Richard with red, puffy eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? I still don't understand. Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, he said, You know what I did the morning after we talked in the library? I called my ex-wife. First time I've called her in 3 years. I wanted to tell her what I was planning, because she always said I only cared about money. I wanted to prove her wrong. What did she say? Carmen asked. She laughed at me, Richard admitted. She said it was probably just some midlife crisis that I'd lose interest in a month. She said I didn't have it in me to actually care about other people. And you know what? That made me so angry because I realized she was right. For years she was right. I didn't care. I was so focused on being successful that I forgot how to be human. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. But then I met you, Carmen. I saw you reading in my library at 2 a.m, holding on to who you are with everything you have, refusing to give up even when the whole world was telling you that you were just a housekeeper. And I thought, that's what courage looks like. That's what purpose looks like. I want some of that. I want to be someone who does things that matter. So I'm your project? Carmen asked. But there was no anger in her voice, just curiosity. No, Richard said, turning to face her. You're my reminder. You're the reason I wake up in the morning now feeling like there's a point to it all. Do you know that since we talked, I've actually been sleeping better? My doctor called to ask if I'd started taking the medication he prescribed because my blood pressure has gone down. I told him no medication. I just finally found something worth doing. He came back to the table and sat down. So yes, I'm helping you. But Carmen, you're helping me too. You're helping me become the kind of person my mother always hoped I'd be. The kind of person who uses what they have to lift others up. That's worth more than all the money in my bank account. Carmen reached across the table and took his hand. It was a bold gesture, one she never would have made a week ago. But things were different now. They were partners, like he'd said. Equal partners. Then we help each other, she said. You help me become a teacher again, and I'll help you become the person you want to be. Deal? Deal, Richard said, shaking her hand formally. And then they both laughed because it felt absurd and perfect at the same time. Theodore cleared his throat. So should we proceed with the paperwork? Miss Rodriguez, are you comfortable signing these documents? Carmen looked at the papers one more time. She thought about Isabella, about her mother, about all the students she used to teach and all the students she might get to teach again someday. She thought about the books in Richard's library and the poem her mother used to read to her about butterflies and transformation. Yes, she said, picking up the pen. Let's do this. Let's change some lives. Richard didn't sleep at all that night. After Carmen left the library, apologizing 3 more times even though he'd told her she had nothing to apologize for, he stayed in that chair. He stayed there as the sun came up, as the light slowly filled the room, making the dust particles dance in the air. He'd lived in this house for 5 years and never watched the sunrise from this room. He'd never noticed how beautiful it was, how the morning light made the old books glow gold and amber. He'd been too busy making money, too busy being important, too busy being alone. Carmen's words kept echoing in his mind. A book unread is like a song unsung. His whole life felt like that lately. Unread, unsung. He had everything anyone could want, but what was he actually doing with it? Making more money to add to money he'd never spend? Buying things he didn't need? Working himself into an early grave so his ex-wife and her yoga instructor could fight over his estate? Around 7 in the morning, he heard sounds from the kitchen. Carmen had started her day like normal, probably exhausted from staying up so late but still showing up because that's what she did. She always showed up. In 3 years, she'd never called in sick, never complained, never asked for anything extra. Richard pulled out his phone and started making notes. Ideas were coming fast now, faster than they had in years. He felt energized in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine or adrenaline. This was different. This felt like purpose. By the time Carmen brought his breakfast to the dining room at 8:30, he had filled 7 pages with notes. Good morning, Mr. Hayes, she said quietly, setting down his plate. Her eyes were red and he could tell she'd been crying. Your eggs and toast, just how you like them. Carmen, wait, he said as she turned to leave. I need to talk to you. Can you sit down for a minute? She looked uncomfortable but sat on the edge of one of the dining chairs. Her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. I've been thinking all night, Richard began, pushing his breakfast aside. About what you said, about teaching, about your daughter, about everything, and I want to make you an offer. A business proposition. Carmen's eyes widened. A business proposition? Hear me out, Richard said. I'm not good at a lot of things. Ask my ex-wife, she'll give you a whole list. But one thing I am good at is seeing opportunities and making things happen, and I see an opportunity here that could help both of us. He pulled out his phone and showed her his notes. Here's what I'm thinking. I want to sponsor your education, all of it. Every class you need, every test you have to take, every certification you need to get. I'll pay for everything. Carmen started shaking her head immediately. Mr. Hayes, no. I cannot accept this. It's too much. I'm not finished, Richard said, holding up his hand. In exchange, you'll work for me. Not as a housekeeper. Well, not just as a housekeeper. I want to start something new. An education program. A foundation, maybe. I don't have all the details worked out yet, but the idea is to help people like you. Immigrants who had careers in their home countries but can't practice here. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers. People with skills and knowledge who are stuck cleaning houses or washing dishes because the system is stacked against them. Carmen's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked different. Mr. Hayes, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Richard leaned back in his chair. How could he explain it? How could he tell her that in one conversation, she'd reminded him of what actually mattered, that she'd shown him how empty his life had become? My mother was a housekeeper, he said finally. It was something he rarely talked about, something he'd tried to forget as he climbed the social ladder. She came here from Ireland with nothing. She cleaned houses for 20 years to put me through school. She used to read to me at night just like your mother read to you. She never got to see me succeed. She died of a heart attack when I was in college, working 3 jobs because she'd worked herself to death trying to give me opportunities. He paused, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. I haven't thought about her in years. Not really. I was too busy proving I'd made it, that I was important. But talking to you last night, I realized I'd forgotten why she did all that. It wasn't so I could make money. It was so I could make a difference. Carmen wiped her eyes with a napkin. Your mother would be proud of you. No, she wouldn't, Richard said honestly. She'd be disappointed. I have all this money, all this success, and what do I do with it? I buy things. I make deals. I work 80 hours a week to make more money I don't need. What's the point of any of it? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his perfectly manicured lawn. You want to know the truth? I'm miserable. I'm 54 years old, I'm alone, and I can't remember the last time I did something that actually mattered. You reading books in my library at 2 in the morning because you refuse to give up on who you are? That matters. That's courage. That's purpose. That's something worth supporting. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, What about my work here? The house? We'll figure it out, Richard said. Maybe we hire someone to help you. Maybe we reduce your hours so you have time to study. Maybe you transition into a different role as the education program develops. I'm not going to leave you without income or without a job. This is a partnership, Carmen. You help me figure out how to make this program work, and I help you get back to teaching. Deal? Carmen stood up slowly. She walked over to where Richard was standing and looked him directly in the eye. You're serious about this? This isn't just something you thought about for 5 minutes and will forget by tomorrow. I'm completely serious, Richard said. I'm going to call my lawyers today. I want to set up a foundation. The Hayes Education Initiative, maybe. Or no, wait. What was your mother's name? Luz, Carmen said softly. It means light. The Luz Foundation, Richard said, trying it out. An organization dedicated to helping immigrant professionals reclaim their careers. We'll start with you, learn from the process, then expand to help others. What do you think? Carmen started crying for real now, not bothering to wipe away the tears. I think you're crazy. I think this is impossible. I think I'm going to wake up and realize I'm still in that chair in the library and this whole conversation was just a dream. It's not a dream, Richard said, feeling more awake than he had in years. But there's one more thing. Your daughter, Isabella, you said she wants to study medicine, but you're worried about the cost. Mr. Hayes, please, Carmen said, holding up her hand. The education program, that's already too generous. I can't ask for more. You're not asking. I'm offering, Richard said. I want to pay for Isabella's education. All 4 years of university, medical school if she gets in, everything. Consider it an investment in the future. Your mother sacrificed so you could be educated. You sacrificed so Isabella could be educated. Now let me be part of that chain. Let me help break the cycle of sacrifice. Carmen sat down right there on the floor, her hands over her face, sobbing. Richard felt awkward standing there, so he sat down too, right there on his expensive hardwood floor in his designer robe, next to his housekeeper who was crying into her apron. Why are you doing this? Carmen asked again through her tears. Really? Tell me the real reason. Richard thought about it. He thought about his empty house, his empty life, his mother's worn hands. Carmen reading poetry in the middle of the night. Isabella growing up without her mother. He thought about all the money sitting in his bank accounts doing nothing but making more money. Because I'm tired of being rich and miserable, he said finally. Because you reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings and stock portfolios. Because my mother didn't sacrifice everything so I could die alone in a 22-room house I never really lived in. Because you deserve better. Your daughter deserves better, and I have the means to help make that happen. Is that reason enough? Carmen looked at him, really looked at him, and slowly nodded. When do we start? Right now, Richard said, pulling out his phone. First call my lawyers. Second call, an immigration attorney I know who specializes in visa issues. Third call, the university where you're taking classes online. We're going to expedite this process. How long did you think it would take you to finish your certification at the pace you were going? 3 years, maybe 4, Carmen admitted. I can only afford 1 class per semester. What if you could take a full course load? Then maybe 1 year. But Mr. Hayes, I still have to work. I can't just stop earning money. You'll keep earning money, Richard said. Same salary, reduced hours. We'll work out a schedule that lets you study, and I'm going to hire an assistant for you. Someone to help with the house so you're not exhausted all the time. Carmen shook her head in disbelief. This doesn't happen in real life. Things like this don't happen to people like me. They do now, Richard said. They're happening right now. But Carmen, I need you to do something for me. Anything, she said. Stop calling yourself people like me, like you're somehow less deserving than anyone else. You're educated, you're skilled, you're hardworking, and you have something I lost somewhere along the way. You have heart. You have purpose. You have courage. So no more of that talk. We're partners now. Equal partners in this, Carmen smiled through her tears. Equal partners. A millionaire and his housekeeper. A millionaire and a teacher, Richard corrected. That's what you are, Carmen. That's what you've always been. Whether you were standing in a classroom in Mexico or reading books in my library at 2 a.m, you're a teacher. And it's time the world recognized that again. Carmen sat in that chair, her hands still trembling slightly as she held the book. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, the moment she'd get caught and lose everything. But she never imagined her boss would ask her to sit down and talk. That wasn't how things worked in her world. I don't know where to start, she said quietly, her accent thicker now that she was nervous. Richard leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked softly under his weight. Start wherever you want. We've got all night, apparently, since neither of us can sleep. Something about the way he said it, almost like he was admitting a weakness himself, made Carmen relax just a little. She looked down at the book in her hands. It was a collection of poems by Pablo Neruda in Spanish. The pages were worn and soft from being read so many times. This book, she began, it's not from your library. I brought this one from home. I was reading it first before I started on yours. It belonged to my mother. Your mother? Richard asked. Carmen nodded, running her fingers over the cover. She passed away 2 years ago, back in Mexico. I couldn't go to the funeral. I couldn't afford the plane ticket, and I couldn't risk leaving the country because of my papers. So I stayed here and kept working, and all I had was this book. Richard felt something twist in his chest. He hadn't known. Of course he hadn't known. He'd never asked. She loved to read, Carmen continued, her voice soft with memory. She only finished elementary school, but she taught herself to read well. Every night, no matter how tired she was from working in the fields, she would read to us. Me and my 3 brothers. She said books were windows to worlds we'd never get to see otherwise. Poor people couldn't travel, she said, but we could go anywhere in a book. Carmen paused, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. You don't want to hear all this. I do, Richard said, and he meant it. Please keep going. She took a deep breath. In Mexico, I was a teacher. High school literature and language. I wasn't rich, but I loved my job. I had my own classroom, my own students. Some of them were so smart, Mr. Hayes, so hungry to learn. It reminded me of myself when I was young. Richard watched her face light up as she talked about teaching. It was like seeing a completely different person. So what happened? He asked. Why did you leave? Carmen's expression darkened. My husband died. Heart attack, very sudden. He was only 42. We had a daughter, Isabella. She was just 3 years old. And my mother, she was getting sick. Cancer, we found out later. The medical bills, the funeral costs, everything fell on me. My teacher salary, it was maybe $300 a month. Good for Mexico, but not enough for what I needed. She set the book down on the small table between them. My brother, he was already working here in California. He said he could help me get a job, that I could make in 1 month what would take me a year to make back home. So I came. I left my baby with my mother and I came here to clean houses. That must have been hard, Richard said. The words felt inadequate, but he didn't know what else to say. Hard? Carmen let out a sad laugh. Mr. Hayes, it broke my heart every single day. I would call home and Isabella would cry for me. When are you coming back, Mama? She would ask. And I would lie and say soon, very soon. But it was never soon. Months turned into years. How old is she now? Richard asked. 18. She's in her last year of high school. She doesn't really know me anymore, not really. I'm just the mother who sends money and calls on Sundays. My mother raised her before she died. Now Isabella lives with my brother's family. Carmen picked up the book again, holding it like a lifeline. So I read. Late at night, when all my work is done, I read. It helps me remember who I used to be. When I'm reading, I'm not just a housekeeper. I'm a teacher again. I'm a person who has thoughts about ideas, about beauty, about life. Does that make sense? Richard nodded slowly. It made more sense than he wanted to admit. When was the last time he'd done something just because it fed his soul? When was the last time he'd felt like a person instead of just a businessman? The books in your library, Carmen continued. I started reading them about 7 months ago. I was dusting the shelves and I saw this book about teaching methods. I don't know why you have it, but I couldn't help myself. I opened it and started reading, and it was like coming home. So I came back the next night and the next night. I told myself I would stop, but I couldn't. What else have you read? Richard asked, genuinely curious now. Carmen's eyes brightened. Oh, so many things. You have books about psychology, about how people learn and think. You have novels from all over the world. History books, science books, poetry. There's a book about astronomy that made me cry because it was so beautiful, talking about how we're all made of stardust. Can you imagine? We're made of the same stuff as stars. Richard found himself smiling. He couldn't remember the last time someone had been this excited about anything in his presence. Usually people were either trying to sell him something or asking him for something, but Carmen was just sharing her pure joy about books. There's something else, Carmen said, her voice becoming quieter. I've been taking classes. Online at night after I finish reading. I'm trying to get my teaching credentials recognized here in America. It's very complicated and very expensive. I can only take one class at a time because that's all I can afford. But I'm doing it. You want to teach again, Richard said. It wasn't a question. More than anything, Carmen admitted. I know it's probably impossible. I'm 51 years old, my English isn't perfect, and I don't have connections here. But I keep trying anyway, because that's who I am underneath this uniform. I'm a teacher. I'm someone who believes education can change lives because it changed mine. They sat in silence for a moment. Richard could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Outside, through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn starting to lighten the sky. Can I ask you something? Carmen said, her voice hesitant. Of course. Why do you have all these books if you never read them? It was a fair question, and Richard didn't have a good answer. The previous owner left them here. I kept them because they looked impressive. Important. Carmen nodded like she understood, though Richard could see she didn't. Not really. How could she understand having so much and appreciating so little? My mother used to say that a book unread is like a song unsung, Carmen said. It's sad. All these beautiful stories and ideas just sitting here in the dark, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Richard looked around the library with new eyes. Thousands of books floor to ceiling, in a room he'd walked past every day for 5 years without really seeing. What a waste. What a terrible waste. Tell me more about your daughter, he said, changing the subject. Isabella, right? What's she like? Carmen's whole face transformed. She's smart, so smart. Top of her class. She wants to study medicine, can you believe it? My little girl wants to be a doctor. But I don't know how we'll afford university. I'm saving everything I can, but it's not enough. It's never enough. Does she know about what you're doing? The classes you're taking? Carmen shook her head. No, I don't want to disappoint her if it doesn't work out. She already thinks I wasted my education by becoming a housekeeper. She doesn't say it, but I can hear it in her voice when we talk. She's ashamed of me, I think. She shouldn't be, Richard said firmly. You sacrificed everything for her. That's not something to be ashamed of. You sound like my mother, Carmen said with a small smile. She used to say that no honest work is shameful. But Mr. Hayes, you have to understand. Isabella grew up without me. She sees her friends with their mothers, and she sees how different her life is. She's angry, and I don't blame her. I'm angry too sometimes. Angry at the world, at circumstances, at myself for not being able to give her what she deserves. Richard sat forward, his elbows on his knees. He'd made more money in the last quarter than most people would make in 10 lifetimes. He'd just closed a deal that would net him another $20 million. And here was this woman, working herself to exhaustion, reading books in secret like it was some kind of crime, just trying to hold on to a piece of who she used to be. It wasn't fair, but more than that, it was wasteful. Here was someone with passion, with knowledge, with so much to offer, and she was spending her life cleaning other people's houses because the world was set up in a way that made that her only option. "Carmen," he said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "What if I told you that things could be different? What if there was a way for you to finish those classes, to get your credentials to teach again?" Carmen looked at him with eyes full of hope and suspicion. "Mr. Hayes, I can't accept charity. I have my pride." "It wouldn't be charity," Richard said, though he wasn't quite sure yet what it would be. "Give me some time to think about this. But I want you to know, you're not going to lose your job because I found you reading. In fact, I think you might have just given me the first good idea I've had in years." Richard Hayes couldn't sleep. Again. He'd been tossing and turning for the past 2 hours, his mind racing with business deals and contracts that needed signing. At 54 years old, he'd built an empire worth over $200 million, but sleep? That was something money couldn't buy. He threw off the expensive silk sheets and sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. The clock on his nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. His bedroom was bigger than most people's apartments, filled with designer furniture that cost more than a car. But tonight, like most nights, it felt more like a prison than a palace. Richard pulled on his robe and decided to head downstairs. Maybe some warm milk would help. His doctor had suggested it last month during his annual checkup. "You work too hard," the doctor had said. "Your body needs rest." Easy for him to say. He didn't have 3 companies to run and shareholders breathing down his neck every quarter. The mansion was quiet as he walked through the hallway. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors. He'd bought this place 5 years ago, right after his divorce. 22 rooms, 8 bathrooms, an indoor pool, and a home theater. His ex-wife had called it excessive. She'd called a lot of things excessive before she left him for a yoga instructor half his age. Richard made his way down the grand staircase, one hand sliding along the polished wooden rail. The house was dark except for the small lights that ran along the baseboards. His housekeeper, Carmen, always made sure those were on. She was thoughtful like that. In fact, she was probably the most reliable person in his life, and he barely knew anything about her beyond the fact that she showed up on time and kept his house spotless. He was halfway to the kitchen when he noticed something odd. There was a light coming from somewhere down the hall, not bright but noticeable in the darkness. It was coming from the library. Richard stopped walking. His first thought was that someone had broken in. His second thought was that one of his staff had forgotten to turn off a lamp. But something made him walk toward that light instead of away from it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe deep down he was just tired of being alone in this massive house. As he got closer to the library, he could hear something. A soft voice, barely above a whisper. Someone was in there. His heart started beating faster. Should he call security? But then he recognized something about that voice. It was Carmen. Richard approached the door quietly. It was slightly open, just enough for him to see inside without being noticed, and what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Carmen was sitting in one of the leather armchairs by the window. She'd changed out of her uniform and was wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a sweater. Her long black hair, which she always kept tied up in a bun while working, was loose around her shoulders. She looked different. Younger somehow. More relaxed. But what really caught his attention was what she was doing. She was reading. Not just casually flipping through a magazine, but really reading. Completely absorbed in a thick book that looked old and well-worn. Her lips moved slightly as she read, and her eyes tracked across the pages with intense focus. Every so often, she'd pause, close her eyes, and smile, as if savoring whatever words she'd just read. Richard had owned this library for 5 years and had barely set foot in it. The previous owner had left behind thousands of books, and Richard had kept them because they looked impressive. Books about philosophy, literature, history, science. He'd never read any of them. Never even thought about reading them. They were just decoration, like the expensive paintings on his walls that he never really looked at. But here was his housekeeper, at 2 a.m, reading like her life depended on it. He watched her for a moment, feeling like an intruder in his own home. There was something peaceful about the scene. The soft lamplight, the quiet of the night, the way Carmen seemed completely transported to another world through those pages. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. Then Carmen shifted in her chair, and the book slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a thud that seemed way too loud in the silent house. She jumped up immediately, her eyes wide with panic. That's when she saw him standing in the doorway. "Mr. Hayes," she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I should not be here. I know this looks bad." She bent down quickly to pick up the book, her hands shaking. Richard could see the fear in her eyes. She thought she was going to get fired. Of course she did. What else would she think? "Please, Mr. Hayes," she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I finish all my work every day. I promise. The house is clean, everything is done. I couldn't help myself. The books, they were just sitting here, and I thought, maybe just one wouldn't hurt. I'm very careful with them. I never damage anything. Please don't fire me. I need this job." Richard stood there, not saying anything. He was trying to process what he was seeing, what he was feeling. This woman had worked in his house for 3 years. 3 years. And he'd never really looked at her before. Not really. She was just the housekeeper. The person who cleaned and cooked and made sure everything ran smoothly. He knew she was good at her job. He knew she was quiet and professional, but he didn't know her. Looking at her now, really looking at her, he noticed things he'd never seen before. The tiredness in her eyes, the calluses on her hands from years of hard work, the way she held that book like it was something precious. The fear in her expression, but also something else. Pride, maybe? Or dignity, trying to hold on despite being caught. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than he'd intended. Carmen hesitated, clutching the book to her chest. 6 months, sir. Maybe 7. Only after I finish all my work late at night. I never take time away from my duties. I would never do that. That's not what I'm asking about, Richard said. He surprised himself with his own tone. He wasn't angry. He was curious. When was the last time he'd been genuinely curious about anything? He walked into the library and gestured toward the chair she'd been sitting in. "Sit down, Carmen, please." She looked at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Sir?" "Sit," he repeated, pulling another chair closer. "I'm not going to fire you. I just want to talk." Carmen sat slowly, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. Richard sat across from her, and for the first time in 3 years he looked at his housekeeper not as an employee but as a person. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Not about your work. About you. Why are you here at 2 in the morning reading books from my library?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to blink them away.